The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a man in a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Daniel Rivera's rent. It was thick cream paper, the kind that whispered old money and careful cultivation, with Daniel's name written in elegant script across the front. No return address, no explanation. Just his name and the apartment number of the cramped 2-bedroom walk-up in Logan Square where he lived with his daughter Maya. Daniel stood in the doorway of his apartment, still wearing the maintenance uniform from his overnight shift at Meridian Tower, and stared at the envelope as though it might explode in his hands. The courier had disappeared down the stairwell before Daniel could ask any questions, his polished shoes clicking against the worn steps, with the rhythm of someone who had other, more important places to be. Inside the apartment, 7-year-old Maya was eating cereal at their small kitchen table, her math homework spread out beside her bowl, her dark curls pulled back in the lopsided ponytail Daniel had managed before his shift ended. She looked up when her father came inside, her brown eyes bright with curiosity behind the glasses she had only recently started wearing. "What's that, Daddy?" she asked through a mouthful of Cheerios. Daniel shook his head and tucked the envelope into his work bag. "Nothing important, sweetheart. Just some mail. How's the homework coming?" Maya wrinkled her nose. "Mrs. Patterson says I need to show my work better, but I can do the problems in my head, so why do I have to write everything down? Because showing your work helps other people understand how you think," Daniel said, crossing to the kitchen to pour himself coffee from the pot that had been sitting too long and now tasted slightly burnt. He drank it anyway, needing the caffeine more than he cared about the taste. Plus, he added with a smile, "It's good practice for when the problems get harder and you can't do them all in your head anymore." Maya considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything, a trait she had inherited from her mother along with those curls and that stubborn chin. "Okay," she said finally, "I'll show my work, but it's going to take forever." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "You've got time. I'll be sleeping for a few hours, but Grandma Elena will be here soon to take you to school." Maya nodded, already refocusing on her homework, with the intense concentration that sometimes worried Daniel. She was so much like Isabella had been, brilliant and focused and carrying the weight of the world on small shoulders that shouldn't have to bear it yet. After Maya left with Elena, Daniel's mother, who had moved in after Isabella's death, to help with childcare, Daniel finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single card, heavy stock with raised lettering, and a phone number written in the same elegant hand that had addressed the envelope. The message was brief and chilling in its simplicity. "Mr. Rivera, we need to discuss your relationship with my daughter. Please call at your earliest convenience. There are matters that require immediate resolution." It was signed, simply, Harrison Cross. Daniel sank onto the edge of his bed, the card still in his hand, and felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling onto his shoulders. Harrison Cross. Even someone like Daniel, who had spent the last 3 years working maintenance shifts and living paycheck to paycheck, knew that name. Harrison Cross was Chicago royalty, the kind of wealth that built hospital wings and museum galleries, the kind of power that shaped city policy with a phone call and a checkbook. Harrison Cross was also the father of Sophia Cross, the woman Daniel had been quietly, carefully, impossibly falling in love with for the past 6 months. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Daniel had met Sophia in the most mundane of circumstances, a broken elevator on the 17th floor of Meridian Tower, where she worked as a corporate attorney and he worked as part of the building's maintenance crew. She had been trapped for 40 minutes while he and his supervisor worked to restore power, and instead of the anger or impatience he had expected from someone wearing a suit that elegant, she had been gracious, even kind. She had asked about his work, about whether he liked the building, about the logistics of maintaining a 30-story high-rise in downtown Chicago. Her questions had been genuine, not the performative interest that some executives showed when they wanted to feel magnanimous. And when the elevator finally jerked back to life and the doors opened, she had thanked him by name, having noticed it on his uniform, and smiled in a way that made something long dormant in Daniel's chest flicker back to life. They had run into each other again a week later in the building's lobby during one of her late nights and one of his early morning shifts. She had been carrying too many files and too much coffee, and he had held the door for her, and somehow they had ended up talking for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, just small moments of connection in the vast anonymity of the city. It became a pattern after that. Brief conversations in hallways, chance meetings by the building's entrance, moments stolen from their vastly different worlds, where they could just be two people who enjoyed talking to each other. Daniel learned that Sophia specialized in contract law, that she ran 5 miles every morning before work, that her father was Harrison Cross, but she rarely spoke about him. Sophia learned that Daniel was raising his daughter alone, that he had once been an electrical engineer before medical debt destroyed that life, that he read philosophy books during his breaks because they helped him make sense of the world. The friendship that developed between them was careful, bounded by the unspoken understanding that their worlds did not easily intersect. Sophia never invited him to the corporate events she attended. Daniel never suggested they meet outside the building. It was a relationship that existed in the margins, safe precisely because it demanded nothing, expected nothing, reached for nothing beyond what it already was. Except somewhere along the way, it had become something more. It happened in small increments, in the way Sophia's face lit up when she saw him, in the way Daniel found himself taking extra care with his appearance on nights when he knew she might be working late. It happened in longer conversations that stretched into hours, in the way they both lingered even when they had other places to be. It happened in the moment. 3 weeks ago, when Sophia had placed her hand on his arm while laughing at something he said, and neither of them had moved away. 2 weeks after that, on a quiet Sunday afternoon when Maya was at a birthday party and Daniel had a rare day off, Sophia had texted him. Just a simple message. There's a small cafe in Wicker Park that makes the best cortados. Would you want to join me? No pressure. They had met at the cafe, and for the first time they had sat across from each other without the buffer of work, without the excuse of chance encounter. They had talked for 3 hours until the barista started stacking chairs around them, and they realized the sun had set without them noticing. As they walked to the train station together, Sophia had stopped under a streetlight and looked at him with an expression that was equal parts hope and fear. "I know this is complicated," she had said quietly. "I know our lives don't make sense together on paper. But I need you to know that these conversations, this time with you, it's the most real thing in my life right now." Daniel had wanted to kiss her then, wanted it so badly his chest ached with the force of restraint, but he had only taken her hand and squeezed it gently. "We'll figure it out," he had said, "one step at a time." That was 2 weeks ago. And now Harrison Cross, a man Daniel had never met, knew about their relationship and wanted to discuss matters that required immediate resolution. Daniel looked at the phone number on the card for a long time. He thought about ignoring it, about pretending the envelope had never arrived. But he knew. Men like Harrison Cross did not make requests. They expected to be ignored. And he knew that ignoring this would not make it disappear. It would only make whatever came next worse. He picked up his phone and dialed before he could talk himself out of it. The line rang twice before a smooth, cultured voice answered. "Mr. Rivera, thank you for calling so promptly. I trust you received my message. Yes, Daniel said, keeping his voice steady despite the anxiety churning in his stomach. What is this about? I think you know what this is about, Harrison said. His tone was not unkind, but there was steel beneath the civility. My daughter has been spending time with you. Considerable time, from what I understand. I'd like to meet with you to discuss the situation. It's not a situation, Daniel said more sharply than he intended. Sophia and I are friends. We care about each other. Harrison was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. Mr. Rivera, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe you're an intelligent man. My daughter comes from a specific world with specific expectations. Her choices affect not just her own life, but the lives of many people, business partners, family obligations, social commitments. I'm sure you can understand why a relationship with someone outside that world might be problematic. Problematic, Daniel repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. Is that what I am? A problem to be solved? You're a man with a child to support and a difficult financial situation, Harrison said matter-of-factly. I'm offering you a way to make that situation easier. Meet with me tomorrow. Hear what I have to say. That's all I'm asking. Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about Maya's glasses that had cost $200 even with insurance, about the student loans from his engineering degree that still haunted him despite the bankruptcy, about the way his mother's arthritis was getting worse and she needed knee surgery they couldn't afford. He thought about Sophia's laugh, about the way she looked at him like he mattered, like he was more than just a maintenance worker in a building full of people who never saw him at all. Where and when? He asked quietly. Harrison gave him an address in the Gold Coast, a private office building Daniel had passed 100 times but never entered. Tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. Come alone. The line went dead before Daniel could respond. He sat in the silence of his apartment, the card still in his hand, and felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling onto his shoulders. He had been here before, in the hospital room where Isabella died, when doctors presented him with treatment options they both knew he couldn't afford. He had been here when he had to choose between keeping his struggling business or declaring bankruptcy to save what little they had left. He had been here in 1,000 small moments over the past 3 years, forced to weigh dignity against necessity, hope against practical reality. But this felt different. This wasn't about him alone. This was about Sophia, about the tentative, fragile thing growing between them, about whether love could exist across the vast chasms that money and class carved into the world. Daniel finally stood and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood he called home. Logan Square was gentrifying rapidly, old brick buildings being converted to luxury condos, corner stores being replaced by artisanal coffee shops. But his block still held out, still maintained the working-class character that had defined it for generations. Kids played in the street. Neighbors called to each other in Spanish and Polish and English. The bodega on the corner still sold loose cigarettes and lottery tickets and knew everyone by name. This was his world, real and gritty and full of people who understood what it meant to struggle. Sophia's world was something else entirely, a place of art gallery openings and charity galas and conversations in rooms where the price of entry was the right last name and the right connections. Could those worlds coexist? Could the space between them be bridged? Or was Harrison Cross right that some divides were too fundamental to cross? Daniel didn't have answers, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was going to that meeting. Not because he was afraid of Harrison Cross, and not because he was tempted by whatever offer might be waiting for him, but because he needed to look Sophia's father in the eye and understand exactly what kind of man would try to buy him out of his daughter's life. And then he would decide what kind of man he was going to be in response. The private office building in the Gold Coast looked exactly as Daniel had imagined it would. All glass and steel and minimalist design, the kind of place where even the air felt expensive. A doorman in a uniform more formal than Daniel's work clothes checked his name against a list, then directed him to the 11th floor with the polite indifference of someone who saw hundreds of people every day and remembered none of them. The elevator was nothing like the ones Daniel maintained at Meridian Tower. It moved in perfect silence, the floor numbers illuminating smoothly as they passed. Soft, classical music played from hidden speakers, and the walls were mirrored, forcing Daniel to confront his own reflection. He had dressed in the best he owned, dark jeans and a button-down shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked exactly like what he was, a working man trying to present himself well in a space designed to make him feel out of place. The elevator doors opened onto a hallway carpeted in deep burgundy, with artwork on the walls that Daniel suspected was original despite being unable to name the artists. A woman in her 50s sat behind a reception desk at the end of the hall, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Rivera," she said, not asked. "Mr. Cross is expecting you. Please follow me." She led him through a door into an office that was less a workspace and more a carefully curated display of wealth and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered sweeping views of Lake Michigan. Leather furniture sat arranged around a mahogany desk that looked antique and probably was. The walls held framed photographs of Harrison Cross, with various politicians and celebrities, casual displays of influence that needed no explanation. Harrison Cross himself stood by the windows, his back to the door, hands clasped behind him. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of bearing that came from generations of certainty. He did not turn around when Daniel entered, did not offer a greeting or a handshake. He simply spoke to the window, to the city spread out below. "Mr. Rivera, thank you for coming. Please sit." Daniel remained standing. He had decided on the train that he would not allow himself to be positioned as supplicant in this encounter. "I'd rather stand, if it's all the same to you." Harrison turned then, his blue eyes, Sophia's eyes, assessing Daniel with the calculating gaze of someone used to evaluating assets and liabilities. He smiled slightly, though whether in approval or amusement, Daniel couldn't tell. "As you wish. I'll be direct. Mr. Rivera, I've taken the liberty of looking into your situation. Single father, deceased wife, medical debt that led to bankruptcy, currently employed in building maintenance despite an engineering degree. A difficult life by any measure." Daniel kept his face carefully neutral. "I'm not here to discuss my life with you. You said you wanted to talk about Sophia." Harrison moved to his desk and picked up a folder Daniel hadn't noticed before. "I want to talk about what's best for my daughter. And with all due respect, a relationship with you is not what's best for her." He opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be a detailed background check. "You have nothing to offer her, Mr. Rivera. No social connections, no financial security, no prospects beyond low-wage work. What you do have is a child who requires significant resources you can barely provide on your own." Daniel felt anger flare in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Maya is well cared for. She's happy and healthy and loved. That's what matters." "Of course," Harrison said smoothly, "but imagine how much better her life could be with additional resources. Better schools, better opportunities, better medical care." "I'm not here to insult you, Mr. Rivera. I'm here to offer you a way to give your daughter the life she deserves." He pulled a check from the folder and placed it on the desk between them. $5 million, he said simply, "in exchange for ending your relationship with my daughter and ensuring you have no further contact with her." The number hung in the air between them like something physical. $5 million. More money than Daniel could have imagined having in 10 lifetimes. Money that would erase every debt, fund Maya's education through graduate school, pay for Elena's surgery and medications, buy them a house in a safe neighborhood with good schools, money that would transform every single struggle Daniel faced into a memory. Harrison watched Daniel's face with the patient certainty of someone who had made this offer before to other people in other contexts and had always received the same answer. He leaned back against the desk, completely relaxed. "I know this seems crude," he said, "but I'm solving multiple problems at once. You get security for your child. Sophia returns to a relationship that makes sense for her future. Everyone benefits." Daniel stared at the check. His hands, calloused from years of physical labor, hung at his sides. He thought about Maya's face when she talked about wanting to go to science camp next summer, an opportunity they couldn't afford. He thought about his mother wincing every time she climbed the stairs to their apartment. He thought about the crushing weight of knowing that no matter how hard he worked, he would never be able to give them the comfortable life they deserved. And then he thought about Sophia, the way she had looked at him under that streetlight, the way her voice softened when she talked about her dreams for a different kind of life than the one her father had planned for her, the way she had trusted him with her truth and how he had promised they would figure things out together. Daniel raised his eyes from the check to meet Harrison Cross's gaze directly. He spoke 3 words that seemed to drain all the air from the room. "She's not yours." The silence that followed was absolute. Harrison's confident expression flickered, confusion passing across his face like a shadow. "I beg your pardon," he said, his voice suddenly less certain. "She's not yours," Daniel repeated, his voice steady now, strengthened by the clarity of finally knowing exactly what kind of man he was. "Sophia is not your possession. She's not a business asset you get to control, or a chess piece you move around to protect your interests. She's a person with her own dreams and choices, and the right to decide who she wants in her life." Harrison's face hardened. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Rivera. $5 million. Do you understand what you're turning down?" "I understand exactly what I'm turning down," Daniel said. "And I understand what I'd be giving up if I took it. My integrity, my daughter's respect, the woman I'm falling in love with. No amount of money is worth that." Harrison moved around the desk, his posture shifting to something more aggressive. "You think love is enough? You think some romantic notion of being true to yourself matters in the real world? I've seen men like you before, men who think their pride is more important than practical reality. You'll regret this." "Maybe I will," Daniel admitted. "Maybe I'll lie awake at night thinking about what that money could have bought, but I'll still be able to look myself in the mirror. I'll still be able to look my daughter in the eye and teach her that people aren't for sale, that relationships aren't transactions, that some things matter more than money. Can you say the same?" The words hung between them, a challenge that Harrison Cross had not anticipated. For the first time since Daniel had entered the office, the older man looked unsettled, as though the script he had prepared for this meeting had been torn up and he didn't know what came next. "You have no idea what you're getting into," Harrison said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "My daughter's life is complicated. There are expectations, obligations, people who depend on her, making the right choices. You will become a liability she cannot afford. Then let her decide that," Daniel said. "Let her make her own choice about what she can and cannot afford. Stop trying to control her life and trust that you raise someone capable of making her own decisions." He turned toward the door, then paused and looked back. "For what it's worth, Mr. Cross, I hope someday you realize that trying to buy your daughter's happiness is just another way of admitting you don't know how to give it to her yourself." Daniel walked out of the office, past the silver-haired receptionist, into the silent elevator, through the lobby with its expensive air, and out onto the street where the real world hummed with traffic and humanity and all the messy complexity Harrison Cross's money tried to insulate him from. His hands were shaking, his heart was pounding, and somewhere in his chest, beneath the fear and the defiance and the uncertainty, was a small, fierce spark of pride. He had been tested, and he had not broken. That evening, after Maya was asleep and Elena had retired to her room, Daniel sat on the fire escape outside his apartment, with his phone in his hand. He stared at Sophia's number for a long time, before finally composing a text. "We need to talk." Not over the phone. "Can you meet me tomorrow?" Her response came quickly. "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" He hesitated, then wrote, "Your father offered me $5 million to stop seeing you. I said no. But I think he's going to make things difficult. I need you to know what's happening before it gets worse." 3 minutes passed with no response. Then his phone rang. Sophia's voice was shaking when he answered. He did what? Daniel told her everything. The envelope, the meeting, the check, the 3 words that had changed everything. When he finished, the silence on the other end stretched so long he thought she might have hung up. Then he heard her take a shaky breath. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "nobody has ever said no to my father before. Nobody has ever chosen me over his money." He didn't know what to say to that. The weight of her words, the realization of what his choice meant to her, settled over him like something sacred and terrifying all at once. "I'm not going to let him control this," Sophia continued, and her voice was stronger now, resolute. "I'm not going to let him control me, not anymore. This is my life. You're my choice. And whatever comes next, we face it together." Daniel closed his eyes, feeling something shift in his chest. "Okay," he said simply. "Together." They stayed on the phone for another hour, not saying much, just being present with each other across the distance. When they finally hung up, Daniel sat alone on the fire escape and looked out at his neighborhood, at the ordinary world he belonged to, and wondered what came next when you told a billionaire no. He didn't have to wait long to find out. The first sign of retaliation came on Thursday morning when Daniel arrived for his shift at Meridian Tower and found his supervisor waiting by the service entrance with an expression that mixed sympathy and discomfort. The man, Carlos, had worked maintenance in Chicago high-rises for 20 years and had developed the 6th sense that all building staff cultivated for recognizing when corporate powers were moving against one of their own. "Daniel," Carlos said quietly, pulling him aside before he could clock in. "We need to talk. There's been a complaint filed against you. Someone claims you've been harassing one of the tenants, making unwanted advances, creating an uncomfortable work environment." Daniel felt his stomach drop. Who filed the complaint? Carlos wouldn't meet his eyes. It came through the building management company, anonymous report from a concerned tenant. "You know, I don't believe it for a second, but my hands are tied." "You're on administrative leave pending investigation," Daniel asked, his mind already calculating bills and expenses and how many paychecks he could afford to miss. Carlos shrugged helplessly. "Could be a week. Could be longer. They're bringing in an outside investigator. Until then, you can't work any shifts in this building. I'm sorry, man. I really am." Daniel nodded numbly and walked back out into the morning cold. He understood exactly what was happening. Harrison Cross was making good on his promise to make things difficult. An anonymous complaint was easy to manufacture, impossible to disprove, and would tie Daniel up in bureaucratic processes designed to protect the building's liability rather than determine actual truth. Without his primary job, Daniel's financial situation went from tight to desperate almost immediately. He picked up extra shifts at a warehouse across town, work that paid less and demanded more physical labor. He came home each night exhausted, his back aching, his hands raw, trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy for Maya, while Elena watched him with increasing worry. "You need to tell me what's happening," Elena said one evening after Maya had gone to bed. "You think I don't notice you leaving before dawn and coming back after dark? You think I don't see how tired you are?" Daniel sat at their kitchen table and told his mother everything. About Sophia, about Harrison Cross, about the meeting and the offer and the complaint that had cost him his best job. Elena listened without interrupting, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. "Your father," she said, "he worked construction his whole life. Dangerous work, low pay. But he never let anyone make him feel small, never let anyone treat him like he was less than human because of what he did for a living." She squeezed his hand tightly. "You did the right thing, mijo. That man's money would have been poison. Better to struggle with your dignity than live comfortable with shame." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. "I just worry about you and Maya, about what I'm putting you through because I couldn't just walk away." Elena shook her head firmly. "You're showing Maya something more important than money. You're showing her that people matter more than things, that love is worth fighting for, that her father is a man who keeps his word and stands up for what's right. Those lessons will last longer than any amount of money in the bank." Meanwhile, across the city in a penthouse apartment overlooking Michigan Avenue, Sophia Cross was conducting her own investigation. She had known her father was capable of manipulation, had watched him maneuver business rivals and political opponents with cold efficiency her entire life. But she had never been on the receiving end of his strategic cruelty until now. She started by calling the management company that oversaw Meridian Tower. Using her corporate attorney credentials and carefully worded questions, she learned that the complaint against Daniel had come through a third-party intermediary, filed electronically with no contact information beyond an anonymous email address. The building's actual tenants, when discreetly surveyed, had no complaints about any maintenance staff. Several specifically mentioned Daniel as helpful and professional. Next, Sophia reviewed her father's schedule, cross-referencing meetings and phone calls against the timeline of Daniel's suspension. She found what she was looking for in a brief notation about a call to the building management company's CEO, a man who sat on the board of one of Harrison's charitable foundations and owed him considerable favors. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Her father had orchestrated Daniel's suspension with the same calculated precision he brought to hostile takeovers. Sophia sat in her office on a Friday evening, the city lights beginning to glow against the gathering dusk, and felt something fundamental shift in her relationship with her father. She had spent 32 years making excuses for him, telling herself that his controlling behavior came from love, that his manipulation was just how powerful men operated in the world. But watching him systematically dismantle the life of a man whose only crime was caring about her forced Sophia to see the truth she had been avoiding. Her father didn't love her. He loved controlling her. There was a difference. She picked up her phone and called Harrison. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the false warmth he used when he wanted something. "Sophia, darling, what a pleasant surprise. We need to talk," Sophia said, her voice cold. "About Daniel Rivera, about the complaint you manufactured to get him suspended, about the fact that you're actively sabotaging someone's livelihood because he refused to do what you wanted." There was a pause. Then Harrison's voice turned to steel. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really," Sophia said, "because I have the building management company's records. I have the timeline of your call to their CEO. I have witness statements from actual tenants saying there were no problems with Daniel's conduct. Do you want to keep pretending you had nothing to do with this?" Another pause, longer this time. When Harrison spoke again, His voice had lost all pretense of warmth. "That man is not appropriate for you, Sophia. I'm protecting you from making a mistake that will define the rest of your life." "By destroying his livelihood," Sophia shot back, "by making it impossible for him to support his daughter." "That's not protection, Dad. That's cruelty." "It's pragmatism," Harrison corrected. "He needs to understand that there are consequences for refusing my offer. People in his position don't say no to people in our position without experiencing the cost of that choice." Sophia felt fury rise in her chest, hot and clarifying. Then maybe people in our position shouldn't be trying to buy other people's lives. Maybe we should recognize that having money doesn't give us the right to manipulate everyone around us into doing what we want. "You sound naive," Harrison said dismissively. "You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. This man has nothing to offer you except hardship and limited prospects. I'm offering you the chance to be with someone from our world, someone who understands the responsibilities that come with our name." "I don't want someone from our world," Sophia said, and her voice was shaking now with the force of finally speaking truth. "I want someone who sees me as a person instead of an asset. Someone who listens when I talk instead of planning what he's going to say next. Someone who chose me over $5 million because he actually cares about me, not about what I represent." The silence that followed was suffocating. "Sophia," Harrison said finally, his voice dangerously quiet, "if you pursue this relationship, there will be consequences. For him and for you. I'm not making threats. I'm stating facts. The world we inhabit doesn't work the way you seem to think it does." Sophia felt something break inside her, the last threads of filial obligation and fear finally snapping. "Then maybe I don't want to inhabit that world anymore," she said. "Maybe I'd rather build something real with someone honest than spend the rest of my life pretending that money and status are substitutes for actual human connection." She hung up before he could respond. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The following Monday, Daniel received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, a woman's voice identified herself as Rachel Kim from the building management company's Human Resources Department. She explained that the investigation into the complaint had been completed and that Daniel was cleared to return to work, effective immediately. The complaint, she said carefully, had been determined to be unsubstantiated. Daniel felt relief flood through him. "Thank you," he said. "When can I come back?" There was a pause on the other end. "Mr. Rivera, I need to be clear about something. The investigation cleared you of wrongdoing, but there have been other concerns raised about potential conflicts of interest, questions about whether your personal relationships with building tenants might compromise your professional objectivity." Daniel's relief curdled into understanding. They were letting him return, but with conditions designed to make his life impossible. "What kind of conditions?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "You'll be reassigned to different floors," Rachel explained. "The executive floors where you previously worked are now off limits. Additionally, any interaction with tenants beyond what's strictly necessary for maintenance duties will be grounds for immediate termination. We need to ensure there's no appearance of impropriety." Daniel closed his eyes. Harrison Cross was more strategic than he had given him credit for. The billionaire couldn't fire Daniel outright without evidence, but he could make Daniel's job conditions so restrictive that seeing Sophia became virtually impossible. Either Daniel would quit out of frustration, or he would violate some vague policy about tenant interaction and get himself terminated with cause. It was a trap with no good escape. "I understand," Daniel said quietly. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning," Rachel said. 6 in the morning. Welcome back." After she hung up, Daniel sat in his apartment and thought about his options. He could quit and find work elsewhere, but jobs that paid as well as Meridian Tower were rare, and he couldn't afford to be unemployed while searching. He could try to fight the new restrictions, but that would likely end in termination and blacklisting from other buildings. Or he could accept the conditions and find other ways to see Sophia outside of work. He texted her the news. "They've let me back, but I can't work on your floor anymore. They've made it clear that any contact with you at the building is grounds for firing. I think your father is trying to make it impossible for us to see each other." Her response came quickly. "Then we make it possible somewhere else. My place or yours." Daniel looked around his cramped apartment with its second-hand furniture and peeling paint. "Not here," he texted back. "I don't want you to see this. I don't want you to think this is all I can offer." The 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her message came through. "Daniel, I don't care about your apartment. I don't care about any of that. I care about you. Let me come over, please." He stared at his phone for a long time. Then he sent her his address. Sophia arrived an hour later, having taken a rideshare across the city instead of having her driver drop her off, where neighbors might notice and report back to her father. She climbed 3 flights of stairs in the building where the elevator worked only intermittently, past hallways that smelled of cooking spices, and heard the muffled sounds of too many lives packed into too little space. When Daniel opened his door, she saw his shame and embarrassment written clearly across his face. Before he could apologize or explain or make excuses, she stepped inside and wrapped her arms around him. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the cramped entryway, while the city hummed around them. When they finally pulled apart, Sophia looked around the apartment with frank curiosity. She saw the toys neatly organized in a corner, the stack of library books on the coffee table, the photographs of Daniel with Maya, and a woman who must have been his wife, frozen in moments of ordinary happiness. "This is where you live," she said simply, "where you've built a life with your daughter, where you've survived and kept going despite everything that's happened. Thank you for letting me see it." Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. He introduced her to Elena, who had been waiting nervously in the kitchen and now assessed Sophia with the sharp eyes of a woman who had learned to recognize genuine character versus performance. After a few minutes of conversation, in which Sophia asked about Elena's arthritis and remembered details from things Daniel had mentioned, and showed none of the patronizing pity that often came from wealthy people in poor neighborhoods, Elena gave Daniel a small nod of approval. "She's good," Elena said in Spanish, knowing Sophia wouldn't understand. "Don't let her go." Maya was at a friend's house for a playdate, which gave Daniel and Sophia time to talk without interruption. They sat on the second-hand couch that Daniel had bought from a neighbor and talked about everything that had happened since the meeting with Harrison. Sophia told him about confronting her father, about the evidence she had found of his manipulation, about the final conversation where she had chosen Daniel over her father's approval. Daniel told her about the warehouse shifts, about coming home exhausted each night, about the fear that he was failing Maya and Elena by being too stubborn to just walk away from something that was making their lives harder. Sophia listened without interrupting, her hand finding his and holding it tightly. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "My whole life," she said slowly, "people have wanted me for what I represented. The cross name, the connections, the money. Even the men my father approved of, they saw me as an acquisition, a trophy that would enhance their own status." She looked at Daniel directly. "You're the first person who ever saw just me, who wanted to know what I thought and felt and dreamed about, not what I could do for them." "That's because you're worth knowing," Daniel said simply. "The money and the name, that's just circumstance. But who you are underneath all that, The woman who asks maintenance workers about their day and remembers their names, who works late because she cares about doing things right, who stands up to her father even when it costs her. That's who I fell for. Sophia felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared that my father is going to keep escalating until he destroys you. I'm scared that I'm being selfish by dragging you into my family's dysfunction. I'm scared that no matter how much we care about each other, the gap between our worlds is too big to bridge." Daniel pulled her closer. "I'm scared too," he said. "I'm terrified that I'm going to fail you, that I can't give you the life you're used to, that eventually you'll realize you gave up too much for too little. But being scared doesn't mean we're making the wrong choice. Sometimes the things worth having are the things that scare us most." They sat together as the afternoon light faded and the apartment filled with the sounds of the building around them. Footsteps overhead, muffled television through the walls, the radiator clanging as it struggled to provide heat. Sophia found herself thinking that she had never felt more at home than she did in this cramped apartment that was nothing like the spacious luxury she had grown up with. When Maya came home an hour later, bouncing through the door with Elena, and immediately freezing when she saw a stranger sitting on their couch, Daniel introduced them carefully. "Maya, this is my friend Sophia. Sophia, this is my daughter Maya." Maya studied Sophia with the frank curiosity of 7-year-olds, taking in the expensive coat and designer bag with the same attention she gave to everything else. "Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" she asked with characteristic directness. Daniel felt his face flush. "Maya, we've talked about asking personal questions." "It's okay," Sophia said, smiling at Maya with genuine warmth. "I hope to be, if that's okay with you." "You're really pretty," Maya said matter-of-factly, "and you smell nice. Do you work with my daddy?" "Not exactly," Sophia said. "I work in the same building, but I'm a lawyer. I help people solve problems with contracts and agreements." Maya's eyes lit up behind her glasses. "Do you have to do a lot of math?" "My daddy says lawyers have to be good at math." "We do," Sophia confirmed, "especially when we're working on financial agreements." "Do you like math?" Maya launched into an enthusiastic explanation of the math competition at her school and how she had won second place even though she was competing against fourth graders. Sophia listened with the same focused attention she brought to depositions and client meetings, asking follow-up questions and offering encouragement. Daniel watched the two most important women in his life connect over polynomial equations and felt something in his chest expand with hope. Over the next 3 weeks, Daniel and Sophia developed a careful routine that existed in the margins of both their lives. They met at small cafes far from downtown, where neither was likely to be recognized. They took walks along the lakefront on weekday mornings when Sophia could claim to be going for her run, and Daniel had a few hours between shifts. They texted constantly throughout the day, mundane updates that felt intimate precisely because they were ordinary. Daniel told Sophia about Maya's parent-teacher conference, where her teacher said she was gifted, but sometimes struggled socially because she thought so differently from other kids. Sophia told Daniel about a case she was working on involving a small business being squeezed out by a larger corporation, and how she was considering taking it pro bono even though her firm would disapprove. They shared not just the highlight reel of their lives, but the frustrating, boring, difficult moments that made up the texture of daily existence. And gradually, without either of them consciously deciding it, they began building something real. Sophia started keeping a change of clothes at Daniel's apartment for the mornings when she came over before work. Daniel learned how Sophia took her coffee and started having it ready when she arrived. Maya began asking when Sophia was coming over again, treating her visits as special events worth marking on the family calendar. But the careful balance they had constructed was fragile, and Harrison Cross was patient in his destruction. The second wave of retaliation came not through Daniel's employer, but through Sophia's. She arrived at her office one Monday morning to find her senior partner waiting with an expression that mixed discomfort and resolve. "Sophia, we need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your judgment." "What concerns?" Sophia asked, though a sinking feeling in her stomach told her she already knew. "There have been questions about your relationship with a building maintenance worker," the partner said carefully. "Questions about whether this relationship might compromise your objectivity or reflect poorly on the firm's reputation. We represent clients who expect a certain standard of professionalism and discretion. My personal life has never interfered with my work," Sophia said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I've won every case I've taken in the past 2 years. My billable hours are the highest in my class. My client satisfaction ratings are exceptional. What exactly is the problem?" The partner shifted uncomfortably. "The problem is perception. We've had several calls from concerned parties suggesting that your involvement with someone so far outside your social circle raises questions about your stability and judgment." "Concerned parties," Sophia repeated. "You mean my father?" The partner didn't deny it. "Harrison Cross is a significant client of this firm, Sophia. He's also a major donor to several institutions where our partners sit on boards. When he expresses concern about his daughter's well-being, we have to take that seriously." "So you're threatening my job because my father doesn't approve of who I'm dating," Sophia said flatly. "We're not threatening anything," the partner said quickly. "We're simply suggesting that you take some time to reconsider your priorities. Perhaps a leave of absence while you sort out your personal situation. With pay, of course. We value you as an attorney, Sophia. We just want to make sure you're making decisions that won't damage your long-term prospects." Sophia stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "I'm not taking a leave of absence. And if this firm is going to let my father manipulate personnel decisions based on his personal vendetta, then maybe I need to reconsider whether I want to work here at all." She walked out before the partner could respond, her heart pounding, her mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. That evening she met Daniel at their usual cafe in Wicker Park and told him what had transpired. As she spoke, she watched his face close off, watched him retreat into the space where shame and resignation lived. "I should never have let this go this far," Daniel said quietly. "Your father is systematically destroying both our careers because I was too stubborn to walk away when I had the chance." "Don't," Sophia said sharply. "Don't you dare blame yourself for my father's cruelty. He's doing this because he can't control me, and that terrifies him. But I'm not giving in. I'm not letting him win." Daniel looked at her with eyes that held too much weariness for someone only 32 years old. "Sophia, be realistic. How long can we keep fighting this? He has unlimited resources, and we have, what? Good intentions and stubborn pride. Eventually he's going to wear us down until we have nothing left." Sophia reached across the table and took both his hands in hers. "Then we fight until we have nothing left. And then we find a way to keep fighting anyway. Because the alternative is letting him win. Letting him prove that money and power are all that matter. That people can be bought and controlled if you just apply enough pressure. I won't accept that. I won't live in a world where that's true." Daniel felt something shift in his chest, the crushing weight of isolation lifting slightly. "You're sure?" he asked. "You're sure this is worth it?" Sophia squeezed his hands tightly. "You're worth it. What we're building is worth it. And teaching my father that he doesn't own me is definitely worth it." They sat together as the cafe filled with the evening crowd, two people choosing each other despite every practical reason not to, and felt the foundation of something stronger than either of them alone beginning to solidify. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, delivered through Maya in a way that Harrison Cross likely never intended. Maya's school had been Daniel's sanctuary, the one place where his struggles remained largely invisible, where Maya could just be a kid without the weight of their financial situation pressing down on her. But that changed when the letter came home in her backpack on a Friday afternoon. Daniel opened it at the kitchen table while Maya did homework beside him and felt his blood turn to ice. The letter explained that due to budget constraints, the school was eliminating its gifted and talented program unless families could contribute to a voluntary enrichment fund. The suggested contribution was $500 per student. For families unable to contribute, students would be placed in standard curriculum classrooms. Daniel read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking. $500 might as well have been $5 million. He was already behind on electricity, barely keeping up with rent, stretching every dollar across too many needs. There was no possible way he could find $500 without sacrificing something essential like food or medicine for Elena. Maya looked up from her homework and saw his face. "What's wrong, Daddy?" "Nothing, sweetheart," Daniel said automatically, then stopped himself. He had promised himself after Isabella died that he would never lie to Maya, that she deserved honesty even when the truth was difficult. "Actually," he amended, "there's something going on at your school. They're asking families to pay money so that the gifted program can continue." Maya's face fell. "How much money?" $500, Daniel said gently, "and right now we don't have that much extra." Maya was quiet for a long moment, her small face working through complicated emotions. "Then I'll just go back to the regular class," she said, trying to sound brave. "It's okay. I can still learn stuff there." Daniel felt his heart break for the 100th time since becoming a single parent. The way his daughter tried so hard to make things easier for him, to not be a burden, to accept whatever circumstances life handed her without complaint. She was 7 years old and already learning to diminish her own needs to accommodate reality. That night, after Maya was asleep, Daniel sat on the fire escape and let himself cry for the first time in months. He cried for Isabella, who should have been there to help carry this weight. He cried for Maya, who deserved so much more than he could provide. He cried for himself, for the exhaustion of fighting battles he kept losing, for the shame of watching his daughter's opportunities narrow because he couldn't afford $500. He was still there an hour later when his phone rang. Sophia's voice was immediately concerned. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Daniel said, but his voice betrayed him, rough with emotion. "What's wrong?" Sophia pressed. "Talk to me." Daniel told her about the letter, about Maya's acceptance of going back to regular classes, about the crushing inadequacy he felt watching his brilliant daughter have doors close because of money she had nothing to do with earning or not earning. When he finished, Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised him. "I'll pay it. It's just $500. Let me do this." "No," Daniel said immediately, more sharply than he intended. "I can't take money from you. That's exactly what your father wants, proof that I'm with you for financial benefit." Sophia's voice turned frustrated. "Daniel, this isn't about my father or proving anything to anyone. This is about Maya and her education. Why does your pride matter more than her opportunity?" The words hit Daniel like a physical blow because they were true. He was so focused on maintaining his dignity, on proving he could handle everything on his own, that he was sacrificing his daughter's needs on the altar of his own stubborn independence. But accepting money from Sophia felt like crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, like proving Harrison Cross right about their fundamental incompatibility. "I need to think about it," Daniel said finally. "Please don't be angry. I just need to figure out what the right thing to do is." "I'm not angry," Sophia said, though her voice carried disappointment. "I just wish you would let me help. Let me be part of your life in ways that actually matter, instead of keeping me at arm's length because you're afraid of what it might look like." After they hung up, Daniel sat in the darkness and wrestled with the question that had been haunting him since the day Harrison Cross offered him $5 million. Where was the line between maintaining dignity and letting pride hurt the people he loved? When did self-sufficiency become selfishness? And how could he accept help without proving right every assumption Harrison Cross had made about their relationship? He didn't sleep that night, but by morning he had made a decision. He called Sophia as soon as he knew she would be awake. "About Maya's program," he said without preamble. "If the offer still stands, I'd like to accept it, but as a loan, not a gift. I'll pay you back over time, whatever schedule works. I need to know this is something I'm working toward, not something I'm taking from you." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said finally. "A loan. Whatever terms you want. We'll draw up paperwork if that makes you feel better." "Thank you," Daniel said, and meant it for more than just the money. "Thank you for understanding why this matters." "I do understand," Sophia said. "And Daniel, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Not everyone can swallow their pride when their child's well-being is on the line. That takes more strength than refusing help ever could." The payment was made anonymously through the school, ensuring Maya never knew her program placement was ever in question. But the incident changed something fundamental in Daniel and Sophia's relationship. They began talking more openly about money and class, and the practical realities of building a life together across such different circumstances. Sophia started to understand the constant mental calculation that Daniel performed every time he made a purchase, the weight of knowing that every dollar spent was a dollar not available for something else. Daniel started to understand that Sophia's wealth was not something she had earned or asked for, but an accident of birth that came with its own burdens and complications. They learned to navigate the uncomfortable spaces where their worlds collided, finding compromises that honored both Daniel's need for autonomy and Sophia's desire to meaningfully contribute. And slowly, painfully, they began to build a foundation strong enough to withstand whatever Harrison Cross threw at them next. The crisis that would force everything into the open came not through Harrison Cross's machinations, but through something far more terrifying. Random chance, the kind of event that reminds you that no amount of money or planning can insulate you from the fragility of life. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late November when Maya's school called. Daniel was between shifts, trying to catch a few hours of sleep before his overnight warehouse work, when his phone rang with the distinctive tone he had assigned to Maya's school. He answered before the second ring, already sitting up, already knowing that schools only called during the day when something was wrong. "Mr. Rivera," the school nurse said, her voice professionally calm but with an undertone that made Daniel's stomach drop. "Maya had an accident during recess. She fell from the monkey bars and hit her head. She was unconscious for about 30 seconds. She's awake now and seems coherent, but given the loss of consciousness, we need her evaluated immediately. I've already called an ambulance." Daniel was pulling on his shoes before she finished speaking. "I'm coming. Which hospital?" "They're taking her to Northwestern Memorial. We'll meet you there." The nurse paused, then added more gently, "Mr. Rivera, try not to panic. She's talking and answering questions appropriately, but head injuries require careful monitoring, especially in children." Daniel made it to the hospital in 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours, his heart hammering the entire train ride downtown. He burst through the emergency room doors to find Maya sitting up on a gurney, looking small and frightened, with a bandage on her forehead and a nurse taking her vital signs. When she saw her father, her brave facade crumbled, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "Daddy," she whispered as he rushed to her side. "I'm sorry. I fell. I wasn't being careful." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Daniel said, pulling her into his arms as gently as he could, while his hands shook with the force of relief and residual terror. "Accidents happen. You're okay. That's all that matters." The doctor who examined Maya was thorough and kind, explaining that while she seemed fine neurologically, they wanted to keep her overnight for observation given the loss of consciousness. Standard protocol for pediatric head injuries. They would do a CT scan to rule out any bleeding or swelling and monitor her through the night to make sure no delayed symptoms developed. Daniel nodded along, understanding the words but not fully processing them, because his mind was already calculating costs. An ambulance ride, an emergency room visit, a CT scan, an overnight hospital stay. Even with his minimal insurance, the bills would be catastrophic. Thousands of dollars he didn't have, added to debt he was already struggling to manage. The financial terror must have shown on his face because the doctor paused. "Mr. Rivera, I know medical costs are a concern, but please don't let that influence your decision about your daughter's care. We have financial counseling available and payment plans. The most important thing right now is making sure Maya is safe." Daniel forced himself to nod. "Of course, whatever she needs." After the doctor left, Maya looked up at her father with eyes too worried for a 7-year-old. "Is this going to cost a lot of money, Daddy? Are we going to be okay?" "We're going to be fine," Daniel said, smoothing her hair back from the bandage with trembling fingers. "You don't worry about that. You just focus on feeling better." But Maya had inherited her father's tendency to worry about practical things, and his inability to hide fear completely. She nestled against his chest and whispered, "I'm sorry I'm expensive." Daniel felt something crack in his chest. "Sweetheart, no. You are never, ever a burden. You're the most important thing in my life. Nothing costs too much if it keeps you safe and healthy." He held her while they waited for the CT scan, stroking her hair and telling her stories from when she was a baby, when her mother was still alive and their biggest worry was whether she would sleep through the night. Maya drifted in and out of sleep, exhausted from the adrenaline crash, while Daniel sat frozen with terror and helplessness and the familiar rage at a system that made parents choose between their child's health and financial ruin. He texted Sophia because he had to tell someone, because holding all this fear alone was more than he could manage. Maya had an accident. She's okay, but they're keeping her overnight at Northwestern Memorial for observation. I don't know when I'll be able to meet up again. I'm sorry. Sophia's response came within seconds. "I'm coming. Which room?" Daniel stared at his phone. "You don't need to do that. I know visiting hours. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She arrived in 15, still wearing her work clothes, slightly out of breath from running through the hospital corridors. When she saw Maya sleeping on the gurney with Daniel holding her hand, something in her expression shifted to fierce protectiveness. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around Daniel from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "How is she?" Sophia whispered. "Doctor says she'll be fine," Daniel said quietly. "Just needs monitoring." Sophia felt the tension vibrating through his entire body. "And how are you?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know how I'm going to pay for this. I'm already behind on bills from the months I was suspended. This is going to bury us." Sophia started to speak, then caught herself. She had learned over the past months that offering money immediately only made Daniel retreat behind walls of pride and shame. Instead, she asked, "What do you need right now? What would actually help?" Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that surprised both of them. "I need to not be alone with this. I need someone to sit with me and help me believe this is going to be okay, even if I don't know how. Sophia pulled a chair up beside his and took his free hand. Okay, she said simply, I'm here. They sat together through the long afternoon and into evening. When Elena arrived after closing the restaurant where she worked part-time, Sophia went to get coffee for all of them, navigating the hospital cafeteria with the same efficiency she brought to everything. When Maya woke up confused and scared, Sophia distracted her with stories about the worst haircut she had ever gotten and the time she got lost in a museum and security had to find her. Around 9 that evening, after Maya had been moved to a regular room and settled into sleep, Daniel and Sophia stood together by the window overlooking the city. I've been thinking about something, Sophia said carefully, about what your life looks like and what my life looks like, and how we're trying to build something together across that gap. Daniel felt his chest tighten, preparing for whatever difficult conversation was coming. Sophia continued, I've spent the last 6 months trying to be respectful of your boundaries, trying not to use my money in ways that make you uncomfortable. But watching you tonight, watching you terrified about your daughter's health and medical bills at the same time, I realize that's not actually respectful. It's just me protecting my own comfort. She turned to face him directly. I have resources that could make parts of your life significantly easier, and refusing to use them when someone I love is suffering isn't noble. It's selfish. I'm asking you, Daniel, to let me help in ways that actually matter, not as charity and not as control, but as partnership. Daniel started to respond, to fall back into familiar patterns of refusal and pride, but Sophia held up her hand. Before you say no, she said, think about Maya. Think about what you would want for her if the situations were reversed. If you had money and someone you loved was struggling, wouldn't you want to help? Wouldn't you feel hurt if they kept refusing? The argument cut through Daniel's defenses because it was exactly what he would feel. He thought about what he would do if Maya grew up and fell in love with someone who was struggling, someone who needed help but was too proud to accept it. He would want her to help. He would want her partner to understand that love meant letting yourself be vulnerable, letting yourself receive and not just give. What are you proposing? Daniel asked quietly. I'm proposing we stop pretending we're two separate people managing separate lives and start acting like what we are, Sophia said. A couple building a future together, which means my resources are our resources, not because you need saving, but because that's what partnership looks like. She continued before he could interrupt. I'm not talking about you becoming dependent on me. I'm talking about building something sustainable where we both contribute what we have. You have time and presence and the ability to create a home that feels warm and real in ways mine never has. I have financial resources and professional connections and experience navigating systems that aren't designed for regular people. We pool what we have and we use it to build something neither of us could build alone. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. What about your father? What about everyone who will say, I'm exactly what they thought, someone using you for money? Sophia's expression hardened. My father has made it very clear that he sees me as property to be managed rather than a person to be loved. I don't care what he thinks anymore. As for everyone else, the people whose opinions actually matter will see what we are, and the people who don't see it, their opinions don't matter. She took both his hands. I love you, Daniel, not despite our differences, but including them. And part of loving you means loving Maya and Elena, means wanting all of you to have security and opportunity and the chance to breathe without constant financial terror. Let me do that. Please. Daniel looked at this woman who had chosen him over wealth and status and her father's approval, who had sat with him through his daughter's medical crisis without complaint, who was offering not rescue but partnership. and he finally let himself say yes. The conversation with Harrison Cross happened 3 days later, but not in the way anyone expected. Sophia had requested a meeting at her father's office, telling him only that they needed to discuss her future. Harrison had agreed immediately, likely assuming this was Sophia finally admitting defeat and asking how to extricate herself from her ill-advised relationship. When Sophia arrived with Daniel beside her, Harrison's expression shifted from anticipation to cold fury. "This is a private, family matter," he said, not even acknowledging Daniel's presence. "He doesn't belong here." "Actually," Sophia said calmly, "he belongs here more than anyone, because this conversation is about my family, and Daniel is part of my family now." Harrison's jaw tightened. "I assume you've come to your senses and want to discuss how to end this situation with minimal damage to your reputation." "No," Sophia said. "I've come to tell you that I'm resigning from the firm. I'm starting my own practice focused on representing people who can't afford the kind of legal firepower your friends use to crush them. And I'm done asking for your permission to live my life." The silence that followed was absolute. Harrison stared at his daughter as though she had announced she was joining a cult. "You're throwing away everything I built for you," he said finally, his voice shaking with contained rage. "Your career, your reputation, your future. For what? For him?" He gestured dismissively at Daniel. "For myself," Sophia corrected. "For the chance to build something that actually matters instead of spending my life making rich people richer. For the opportunity to come home at night and feel like I did something worthwhile instead of just profitable." She paused, then continued more gently. "Dad, I know you think you're protecting me, but you're not. You're suffocating me. You're so afraid of losing control that you're destroying any chance we have at a real relationship." "I've given you everything," Harrison said, and for the first time Daniel heard something other than anger in his voice. Hurt, confusion, genuine pain. "Everything you have is because of what I built. The security, the opportunities, the life you've been able to lead. And you're just going to throw it away?" "You gave me things," Sophia said quietly, "but you never gave me yourself. You never asked what I actually wanted or needed. You just decided what my life should look like and got angry when I didn't follow the script. That's not love, Dad. That's control." Harrison turned his attention to Daniel for the first time, really looking at him. "And you," he said, his voice dripping with contempt, "you think you've won something. You think taking my daughter away from her family and her life is some kind of victory." Daniel met his gaze steadily. "I haven't taken anything from Sophia. She made her own choice. And for what it's worth, I don't think I've won anything. I think we're all losing something here because you can't accept that your daughter is an adult capable of making her own decisions." He continued before Harrison could interrupt. "You offered me $5 million to walk away from her, and I said no, not because I'm stupid or because I don't understand what that money could mean for my daughter, but because I understood something you apparently don't. Sophia isn't something to be bought or sold or controlled. She's a person, and treating the people we love like possessions we get to manage is a guaranteed way to lose them." Harrison's face had gone pale. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "If you walk out that door, Sophia, there will be consequences. I'll cut you off completely. No more trust fund, no more family money. You'll be on your own." "Good," Sophia said simply. "I should have been on my own a long time ago." She stood, and Daniel stood with her. They walked toward the door together, and just as they reached it, Harrison spoke again. His voice was different now, stripped of its usual confidence. "Sophia, wait." They turned back. Harrison was standing by the window, his back to them, his shoulders slumped in a way Daniel had never seen before. "Your mother," Harrison said quietly, She used to tell me I was going to push you away if I didn't learn to let go. I told her she was being dramatic, that giving you structure and guidance was what good fathers did. He turned to face them, and for the first time, Daniel saw not a powerful billionaire but an old man who had just realized he had lost the thing that mattered most. I don't know how to do this, Harrison admitted. I don't know how to be your father without trying to control your life. It's the only way I know how to show I care. Then learn, Sophia said, and her voice was gentle now, sad. Learn to trust that you raised someone capable of making good decisions. Learn to love me enough to let me make my own mistakes. Learn to see that trying to protect me from every possible hardship is just another way of saying, you don't believe I'm strong enough to handle my own life. She walked back across the office and stood in front of her father. I don't want to lose you, Dad, but I can't keep sacrificing myself to maintain a relationship where I'm never allowed to be fully myself. If you want to be part of my life, it has to be on different terms. It has to be as equals, not as controller and controlled. Harrison looked at his daughter, then at Daniel standing by the door, then back at Sophia. What he saw in her expression must have finally convinced him that this was not a negotiation he could win through force or manipulation. What would those terms look like? He asked finally. Sophia glanced at Daniel, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. For starters, she said, you stop investigating Daniel. You stop manipulating his employment. You stop using your influence to make our lives harder. You accept that we're together and that I'm happy, even if it's not the life you planned for me. And in return, Harrison asked. In return, Sophia said, you get to know your daughter, the real me, not the version you wanted me to be. You get invited to Sunday dinners in Daniel's apartment, where we eat food Elena cooks and play games with Maya. You get to meet the man I love and see why I chose him. You get a relationship built on honesty instead of control. Harrison was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that surprised everyone in the room. I'd like that. I don't know if I can do it perfectly, but I'd like to try. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Trust that had been broken over decades couldn't be rebuilt in weeks or even months. But slowly, painfully, with setbacks and arguments and moments of frustration on all sides, something began to shift. Harrison started showing up to Sunday dinners, awkward at first in the cramped apartment, so different from his usual environments. He sat at the second-hand table and ate Elena's cooking and listened to Maya explain her latest math competition with the same focused attention he brought to board meetings. He learned that Daniel had been an engineer and began asking questions about his work, genuine questions rather than interrogations. He watched the way Sophia looked at Daniel when she thought no one was noticing, the softness in her expression, the ease in her posture. He saw his daughter laugh more in one evening in that small apartment than he had seen in years of formal dinners and charity events. And gradually, Harrison began to understand what he had been missing, the difference between controlling someone's life and being part of it, the wealth of relationships built on genuine connection rather than obligation, the way Maya looked at him not with fear or calculation, but with the straightforward curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned to see people through the lens of their bank accounts. 3 months after the confrontation in Harrison's office, on a cold February evening, the family gathered in Daniel's apartment to celebrate Maya's 8th birthday. The apartment was decorated with homemade decorations, balloons from the dollar store, and a cake Elena had baked that morning. It was nothing like the elaborate parties Harrison had thrown for Sophia when she was growing up, with their professional entertainers and designer cakes and guest lists that read like a social register. But watching Maya blow out her candles, her face glowing with happiness, while Daniel and Sophia and Elena and even Harrison sang off-key, The old man felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The simple, uncomplicated joy of being present for a moment that mattered not because it was impressive, but because it was real. After Maya had torn through her presents, including a microscope from Harrison that had made her scream with excitement, the adults sat together while the birthday girl examined slides with the intensity of a scientist discovering new worlds. Harrison cleared his throat, uncomfortable with vulnerability, but pushing through it anyway. "I owe you an apology," he said, looking at Daniel. "Actually, I owe you several. For the investigation, for the suspension, for treating you like an obstacle rather than a person, for assuming that because you didn't have money, you didn't have value." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I appreciate that. And I'm sorry, too, for judging you before I knew you, for assuming that because you had money, you couldn't understand what love looked like. We were both wrong about each other." Harrison smiled slightly. "For what it's worth," he said, "you were right. About Sophia not being mine to control, about love not being transactional, about all of it." He paused, then continued. "I spent so many years believing that my job as a father was to clear every obstacle from her path, to use my resources to make sure she never had to struggle. I didn't understand that struggle is how we become fully human." He looked at his daughter, who was watching him with tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," he said to Sophia. "Not because of what you've accomplished in your career, though that matters, but because you were brave enough to choose your own path even when it meant disappointing me. That takes more strength than I ever gave you credit for." Sophia crossed the small room and hugged her father, and Harrison held his daughter in a way he hadn't since she was Maya's age, before he had decided that displays of affection were weakness and that love was best shown through providing rather than presence. When they pulled apart, both were crying, and neither was ashamed. That night, after everyone had gone home and Maya was asleep, clutching her new microscope, Daniel and Sophia stood together on the fire escape, looking out at the city lights. "You know what's funny?" Sophia said, leaning against Daniel's shoulder. "My father spent $5 million trying to get rid of you, and in the end, the only thing that changed his mind was seeing you read bedtime stories to your daughter." "Money doesn't change people," Daniel said quietly. "Connection does. Presence does. Showing up consistently even when it's uncomfortable, that's what transforms relationships. Your father just needed to be reminded of what he already knew before fear made him forget." Sophia turned to face him fully. "I meant what I said in your father's office," Daniel said before she could speak, "about building something together, about being partners." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box that had been burning a hole there all evening. "It's not a big ring," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple band with a single small diamond. "I bought it with money I saved from the warehouse shifts, so it's paid for honestly. No loans, no help. Just me choosing you the same way you chose me." Sophia stared at the ring, then at Daniel, her eyes wide. "Are you," she started, her voice shaking, "are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you want to build a life together," Daniel said. "Not my life or your life, but our life, with all the complications and compromises and challenges that come with it. I'm asking if you want to marry a maintenance worker who comes with a daughter and a mother and more baggage than money. I'm asking if you're sure this is really what you want, because once we do this, there's no going back to being separate people, pretending our worlds don't have to fully merge." Sophia laughed through her tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it. The complications and compromises and challenges. The daughter who is brilliant and will probably be smarter than both of us combined. The mother who makes the best tamales I've ever eaten and who already loves me like family. The baggage and the struggle and the life that won't look anything like what I grew up with. Yes to building something real instead of something impressive. Yes to you. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and they stood together on the fire escape of a cramped apartment in Logan Square, two people who had found each other across an impossible divide and decided that love was worth the bridge building required. Inside, Maya stirred in her sleep, dreaming of molecules and microscopes. Elena snored softly in her room, her arthritis eased by new medication that Sophia had quietly arranged through Harrison's insurance connections. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that suddenly felt less empty, Harrison Cross sat with a photo album he hadn't opened in years, looking at pictures of a young Sophia and remembering when being her father had meant presence instead of control. The wedding 6 months later was small, held in the community center near Daniel's apartment, with decorations that Elena and Maya had made together and food that combined cultures and classes in ways that would have been unthinkable in Harrison's world a year before. But he was there, walking his daughter down the aisle, with tears streaming down his face, no longer trying to control the narrative but simply grateful to be part of the story. As Daniel and Sophia exchanged vows, they had written themselves, promising not perfection but presence, not ease but effort, not certainty but commitment. The small room filled with everyone who mattered. Elena dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Maya stood beside her future stepmother holding the rings with solemn responsibility, and Harrison Cross, who had learned the hard way that some things couldn't be bought, stood witness to the truth he had spent millions trying to deny. Love wasn't transactional, it was transformational, and sometimes the greatest wealth was found in the willingness to choose connection over control, presence over perfection, and partnership over pride. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.